This is Off the Cuff, and I'm Steve from TorahFamily.org. Today, I'm bringing to you what I believe is one of the most important teachings I've ever done. I ask all of my friends in ministry to please listen to what I present in this teaching. I urge everyone to please listen to what I present in this teaching. Depending on your current understanding of the Scriptures, you may find it encouraging, or you may find it challenging. Wherever you currently stand on the topic, we ask that you consider this teaching and pray on it with a humble heart. Let's start with some verses. Isaiah 46:10. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. Ecclesiastes 1:9. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. You will find these verses will be the very foundation to this teaching. That being said, let's go to the book of Judges. Judges 17, starting in verse 6. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. Everyone did as he saw fit. Now, let's keep reading on from this verse. Let's read the story found here and get the context of the days of the judges. Continuing in verse 7. A young Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, who had been living within the clan of Judah, left that town in search of some other place to stay. On his way, he came to Micah's house in the hill country of Ephraim. Micah asked him, "Where are you from?" "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah," he said, "and I'm looking for a place to stay." Then Micah said to him, "Live with me and be my father and priest, and I'll give you 10 shekels of silver a year, your clothes, and your food." So the Levite agreed to live with him, and the young man was to him like one of his sons. Then Micah installed the Levite, and the young man became his priest and lived in his house. And Micah said, "Now I know that Yahweh will be good to me, since this Levite has become my priest." He said, "Now I know that Yahweh will be good to me, since this Levite has become my priest." Now, are all Levites supposed to be priests? No, only those who are from the lineage of Aaron, as shown here in Exodus 29. However, Micah thought he was doing good. He was thinking he was going to have favor from Yahweh. He thought Yahweh would surely bless him. Was he wrong? Yes, he was wrong. But did he think he was right and would be blessed? Yes, he did. He wasn't willfully doing what was wrong in his eyes. He was doing what was right in his eyes. He was doing what he thought was right. This is where we see the proverb come true. Proverbs 19:2. It is not good to have zeal without knowledge, nor to be hasty and miss the way. Now, remember, Isaiah 46:10 and Ecclesiastes 1:9 are the underlying current to this teaching. That being said, today is no different from what we see with Micah in the book of Judges. We have people wanting to put others over them just the same. They think it's the right thing to do. The whole book of Judges closes out with this line. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. That's the last verse of the whole book of Judges. It's virtually the theme of the book. Some people look at this verse like it's the people intentionally doing evil. But it's not that at all. These people in the book of Judges were trying to pursue the Father. And what do we see today? Everyone doing as he sees fit. It's no different with us. look at all the different views we have in the faith today. People divide over the multiple ways of how to pronounce Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. People divide over the multiple calendars that are out there. People divide over the discussion of when a day starts or when it ends. On and on, the things keep going, and they continue to go. But everyone is doing what's right in their own eyes. Is that a bad thing? No. You're holding to what you think is right. If you are convinced of this, then that is what you are going to follow. If someone else believes otherwise, then he's going to do otherwise. But not out of maliciousness, rather out of a sincere heart of pursuing the Father. This is why we shouldn't judge someone with where they may be in their walk with the Father. Everyone is doing what he thinks is right. We just all differ on the answers. And that's okay. So, this verse is not about doing evil, not at all. It's about the people not knowing, but still trying to do what's right. And that's what we have today, just the same. Let's take it a step farther and show the history of what I'm saying. Let me show you the cyclical pattern we're in right now. I mean, right now. And we don't even realize it. We're not trying to do it, but we're in it nonetheless. In reality, it's Isaiah 46:10 taking place right in front of us. First, we have Moses. He gave the law. Then we have Joshua. He continued leading in that leadership. Then we have the judges. They departed from the law, but they tried returning multiple times over. But they failed over and over. Why? Because there was no king, as the verses said. Then we see the time of the kings. The kings, they came back to the law. That's the pattern. You will not get away from this pattern. And just as Isaiah 46:10 says, this reveals what is to come. Now, check this out. Yeshua comes. The prophet likened unto Moses brings us back to the law. He brought full understanding of the Torah, just like Moses did. Then we have the Jerusalem Council. They continued leading in Yeshua's leadership. Just like who? Just like Joshua after Moses. After that, what do we have? Today, everyone is doing what's right in their own eyes. We're trying, oh man, we're trying, but we're all over the board. It's just like in the days of the judges. So what's next? The return of the King. If there's ever been a time for Yeshua to come, oh, it's now. There has never been a better time for Yeshua to return than now. It's all right there in front of us. So again, we have Moses and Yeshua, Joshua and the Jerusalem Council, judges, just like today, the kings and the return of the King, Yeshua. It's all right there. He makes known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. Now, consider this. At Mount Sinai, we see Moses, Aaron, Aaron's 2 sons, and the 70 elders. That was the leadership established at that time. And then we see Moses set up leadership from the advice of his father-in-law. So, he set up leadership throughout the camps. The simple cases were for those leaders to handle. All the difficult cases were for Moses. This same principle applied under Joshua. But when the days of the judges came, everything was in disarray. But in this verse, in Exodus 24, we see Moses, Aaron, Aaron's 2 sons, and the 70 elders. Yahweh doesn't waste words. They are there for a reason. That being said, please consider how we see Isaiah 46:10 come to play in the New Testament. At Yeshua's first coming, he sent out the 72 disciples. Why 72? It's symbolic of Moses and Aaron with the 70 elders and Aaron's 2 sons. You see, Yeshua is the prophet likened unto Moses, and he is currently our high priest in the heavenly temple as Aaron was on earth. Thus, the 72 represent the 2 sons of Aaron and the 70 elders, while he represents Moses and Aaron. Everything is cyclical. It may not always be identical, but it will always be cyclical. And just as the difficult cases were taken to Moses, Yeshua brought clarity to the confusion just the same. Then we see the most difficult cases taken to the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15. They carried the torch just as Joshua did. We know that Yahweh put Joshua in charge after Moses. But who did Yahweh put in charge after Joshua? He didn't. The same is seen in the New Testament. There is no doubt the disciples took the mantle after Yeshua, which was often referred to as the Jerusalem Council. But who did Yahweh tell the Jerusalem Council to continue in their role after them? He didn't. Persecution hit, and everything was disbanded. So just as with Joshua, there was no passing of the mantle. 70 A.D. brought all of that to an end, just as it ended with Joshua, showing Isaiah 46:10 to remain true. Some might say, oh, but Steve, the church fathers did this and the church fathers did that. But we are to call no one father. And again, we are living in the days likened unto the judges. Everyone is doing what's right in his own eyes. But the point is, just like with Joshua, we never see the Jerusalem Council pass that baton forward. It's as if the last 2,000 years, that being 40 Jubilees, has been a time of testing. And now we have multiple difficult cases, and we have no one to go to in hopes to settle those issues. That's why we're all over the board. There's no king. Yes, he's there. We have him. But until he's here to straighten it all out, we continue as in the days of the judges. We're living in times where everyone has something right and everyone has something wrong. However, just as they took the difficult cases to Moses and to the Jerusalem Council, many want you to come to them and let them decide now. They want to be that leadership. Little do they know, they are acting in the role of Korah. They aren't doing this on purpose, mind you, but just as Korah wanted that authority with Moses, they are seeking that authority as well. And just like Korah, they want you to submit to their leadership. They try to claim that authority for themselves and try to make the people come under their covering, just as Korah did. Back in the day, we went to a church where the minister told us we couldn't leave. Angela and I had discussed it, and we decided it was time for us to move on and start a home fellowship closer to where we lived. So I politely called the minister up to let him know we were going to start doing a home fellowship near where we lived. He then replied, "Well, I don't give you permission to go." I was kind of taken back, and I said, "Well, I'm not calling for your permission. I'm simply calling to let you know that we believe the Father is calling us in a different direction at this time." He replied, "Well, you're in covenant with us." And again, kind of taken back, I said, "No, I'm in covenant with Yahweh and with my wife, not you." Then, for the next 30 minutes, with a raised voice. He proceeded to tell me how I'm wrong and I'm in sin and that I would be under a curse if I didn't stay under him. But I know what Yahweh told my wife and I. As far as we were concerned, all the more after that conversation, we would have been under a curse if we had stayed. The Pharisees said basically the same thing. They basically said, don't listen to him, talking about Yeshua. Only listen to us, they basically said. They got jealous of Yeshua because he started pulling their followers away. Many leaders are following the same example and don't even know it. They want people to stay under their leadership. It's history repeating all over again. Now, do these ministers say good things? Absolutely. Do they have lots of doctrine correct? Absolutely. Can they bring people to the truth? Oh my goodness, yes. Left and right even. But that doesn't make what they're doing right. If anyone says, you should only listen to me, well, those are the ones you should politely walk away from. To address this, we need to first ask, did Paul ever tell people to submit to pastors? The answer is no. He tells us to submit one to another. Ephesians chapter 5, addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord with your heart, giving thanks always for everything to God the Father in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. As one continues to read in these verses to the church at Ephesus, we see commands for the wives to submit to their husbands. We see commands for the husbands to love their wives. Children are to obey their parents. Fathers not to anger their children. Slaves to obey their masters, and the masters to respect those under them. But never do we see a command to submit to a pastor. And remember, this is the same book, the previous chapter actually, where we see the often quoted verses regarding pastors and teachers. Let's read it. Ephesians chapter 4. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we all attain the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves, and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. And yet, after being told about these positions in the body of Messiah, we are never told to submit to them. Never. We are only told to submit one to another. We are to serve one another. Why? Because the body is filled with people who have these gifts. Fellowships are filled with these people. We are to learn and grow with and from one another. When a body of believers submits to one man or even a group of men, those men are doing the exact opposite of what Yeshua said we are to do. Mark chapter 10. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you." Let me read that again. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Yeshua said we are to serve one another. This is exactly what Paul said. We are to submit to one another out of reverence for Yeshua. Meaning, Yeshua said it. So out of reverence to him, that's what we are to do. Speaking of that, now consider what Paul says in the next verse of chapter 4. He says we are to grow and build each other up with Yeshua as our head. Yeshua, our leader. Verse 15. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so it builds itself up in love. And then he tells them not to walk as the Gentiles do in the following verse, verse 17. Now, this I say and testify in the Lord, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their minds. He said to no longer live as the Gentiles do, which included what? Well, according to Yeshua, that would involve lording it over the people. Yeshua is our head. Yeshua is our master and Lord. We submit to him, not man. Thus, Paul's words to submit in humble service to one another in reverence to Yeshua. No pastor, no board of elders. Instead, to one another in reverence for Yeshua. And Peter said the same thing in 1 Peter chapter 5. Not lording it over the people, but rather to be examples of serving. It was about serving the people, not making people submit to them. In fact, this is what Peter said in the book of Acts. Peter stood before the religious leadership of his day and said, we must obey God rather than men. His message stayed the same the whole way through. We place no man over us. We submit to one another in reverence to Yeshua. In the New Testament, we see where some were trying only to follow certain men. But Paul made it clear these were only men, fellow servants. So we don't follow men. We follow Yeshua. No one should ever say, listen only to me. There is no command in the New Testament to only follow one man. In fact, what if the leaders in the New Testament said that? Then they would have had to reject what Paul said. They would have only listened to their leaders then. They would have also never consulted the Jerusalem Council, as they would have only listened to their leaders. But what do we see? We see where Paul has his letters spread all around. We see where James sends his letter to all the tribes of Israel. This alone shows we aren't to just listen to one man. You see, just because someone has the gift of teaching, it doesn't mean you make them your teacher. Yeshua said we have one teacher, him. Matthew 23. Nor are you to be called teacher, for you have one teacher, the Christ. The greatest among you will be your servant, for whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Thus we submit to one another, as Paul said, in reverence for Yeshua. There is to be no one over us but Yeshua. We teach one another. We encourage one another. We help one another. And though many may have the gift of teaching, we do not place them over us as our teacher, if you will. We all have one teacher who we submit to, and that's Yeshua and Yeshua alone. I've heard where some say that they are acting Levites today, for today, if you will. However, There are no verses that describe an acting Levite. The only verse that can be even remotely applied to acting Levites is found in Judges chapter 17, verse 6, with the story of Micah that follows after it. Ancient times, what is still to come. If a leader says you're only to follow them, what gives them the authority to declare themselves in that role? Nothing. Nothing does. There is nothing that declares them to have that authority in the Scriptures to the times we're living in today. It's a time that's equivalent to the days of the judges. I know the intentions of many people that want to follow the church mentality. I get it. I do. But there's no Jerusalem Council today, so there's no accountability to those churches now, which enables them now to do what they want, when they want, how they want. And it's all under the guise of following the Scriptures. However, the Scriptures show that can't be done today. And we've all been there. But now there's no one over those fellowships to keep them in check. They're taking that authority upon themselves. They're placing themselves in front of Yeshua in the lives of many. Let me say that again. They're placing themselves in front of Yeshua in the lives of many. Now that may sound odd, but please consider 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Now I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ. Please notice it doesn't say pastor. And the head of the woman is man. And the head of Christ is God. You can't argue with that. One more time. Now I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ. And the head of the woman is man. And the head of Christ is God. As already mentioned, the hard cases went to Moses and Joshua. They kept the leaders in check. However, Korah, a fellow Levite, didn't like it. He said they were all able to do that. You see, Korah was a Levite, and he wanted a piece of the pie, if you will. He wanted that same authority as Moses. And now, many are wanting to do the same with Yeshua. But no one gets that authority. That's why Paul said the head of every man is Christ, not a pastor, not a plurality of elders or leaders. The head of man is Christ. Even Paul and the Jerusalem Council knew their role in merely making sure Torah was rightly pursued. That was the only authority they had. But once the Jerusalem Council was no more, there was no one to keep the leaders accountable. The Jerusalem Council wasn't to be, we're in charge. The Jerusalem Council was there to help the fellowships in examining the Torah. The Torah was and is the final authority, not men. It should always be that Scripture is the final authority and not man. Please don't let a man come between you and Yeshua. Please don't get between another man and Yeshua. This also includes not putting yourself under the authority of what is called a plurality of elders. This would consist of home fellowships as well. My concern with that is, what if they're wrong? Who do we go to? Acts 15 proves the need of the Jerusalem Council, even with the plurality of elders that was given to the churches. So even if a church has a group of elders and leaders, we still have no one to keep them in check. Even the fellowships needed the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15, and James made the Word be the final authority. It's all about making sure the Word is being properly followed. It's not about making people submit to leaders. Some might say, but Steve, what about Acts 14? It says Paul appointed elders in each church. Absolutely. But as given throughout the rest of Paul's writings, these men were not over the church. They were simply there to keep order. Just as the church in Corinth and Ephesus had pastors and elders, they were not to be over the people. And again, the leadership of all those fellowships had the Jerusalem council to keep them in check. We don't have that today. We're living in the days of the judges. Everyone is doing what's right in his own eyes. We know Paul started many fellowships. Now, did he just start them and let them go? Did he say, okay, you leaders, you've got this now and you're in charge, so you're on your own? No. He went back and checked on them. Those fellowships even sent Paul questions that he addressed, which meant everyone in those fellowships had the questions, leaders and all. When we study the church at Corinth, we see that their leadership wasn't faring too well in the eyes of Paul. Paul had to correct them on many things, big things even. They had quarrels. He said they weren't spiritual at all. They were arrogant, and they had sexual immorality. There were many more things in that fellowship. And yet, we're to believe a fellowship with a plurality of elders today can't mess up like they did? Thus, today, everyone is doing what's right in their own eyes. Some would say, oh, but Steve, we would never make the same mistakes that Corinth did. Well, of course not. There's just potential to make all brand new ones. But there's no Jerusalem council to keep those mistakes in check. This is why some are wanting to make a new council for today. But who's going to follow that new council? This is the exact same thing we've seen over the last 15 centuries. A council is formed, which is basically a denomination. Then there's a disagreement. Then there's a split, and suddenly a new council, that being a denomination, is formed. Then there's a disagreement. Then there's a split, and suddenly there's a new council, denomination, being formed. And here we are today with 30,000 councils, denominations. Someone once even told me we need to get men to submit to men. But again, Peter said we obey God, not men. So how do we submit to Yahweh? Through His Word. It's about rightly interpreting His Word. It's not about submitting to men. We will stand before Yahweh for judgment, not men. We're given a great example of how we are to obey the Father and not what man says in 1 Kings chapter 13. A young prophet was given instructions by Yahweh in verse 9. But then an older prophet told the young prophet the exact opposite, saying that he had heard the exact opposite from Yahweh. Sadly, the young prophet obeyed what the older prophet told him. He put the older prophet's words over what Yahweh specifically told him. Then Yahweh actually did speak through the older prophet, and it was judgment for not doing what he had instructed him to do. Then the young prophet was killed by a lion while on his way. Many leaders could say, but Steve, I'm not lying like the old prophet. That's not even close to a fair analogy. You may very well be doing what you believe is right, just like we see in the book of Judges. But the whole point in the story of these two prophets is that we have to do what Yahweh tells each of us. We are not to put man between us and Yahweh. Neither are we to place ourselves between men and Yahweh. If someone tells you something and the Father doesn't reveal the same to you, then you have to continue in what the Father has given you. You can't put the word of a man over what Yahweh has shown you through the Scriptures. Again, we are living in the days just like the judges. This all being said, I know there are many, many great ministers out there. But I am begging you today, please, please reconsider the church model you're following. We are following the pattern that was established through history. There's nothing new under the sun. I believe with all my heart that the men of fellowships should raise the younger men up, teaching and training them. The same with the women in teaching the younger women. The foundation in this is to teach them to serve one another in humility. We will not all agree on everything until Yeshua returns. He's the one who has all the answers. But until then, we are in the pattern of the judges. In those days, there was no king. But ladies and gentlemen, the king is coming. He is coming. But we can't ignore the fact that history is cyclical. We can't ignore the fact that Yahweh makes known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. We are now forced in a day where we are without the king. We are now forced in a day where we can't follow the pattern of the New Testament fellowships. The times we are in are just like the days of the judges. They were between Joshua and a king. We are forced in a day where everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes. I plead with every fellowship that is out there, please re-examine the church model that you're following today. Please don't let a man get between you and Yeshua. Please don't get between another man and Yeshua. Please take this to heart. Take this to prayer. I know, the big questions that come up then is, well, what do we do today then? How are fellowships to gather together? What's the order in which we're to handle ourselves? And many others, I know. So, what do I suggest for fellowships in this day that we live in? Well, we started as a home fellowship that simply came together to study and read the Torah together. We eventually outgrew our home, so we found a bigger place that was closed on Shabbat, and now we rent it every other Shabbat now. This enables everyone to gather in smaller groups on the other Shabbats, but enables us to all come together as one big group twice a month. When we come together, we read one chapter at a time. After each chapter, we discuss what we just read and learn from one another. It's not the Steve show or anybody else's show. We all simply grow and learn together. We've all done that. We've all learned from one another in this. It's not just one person preaching. It's everyone growing with one another, giving input, giving thoughts. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? Well, I don't know, maybe this. And we start sharpening one another, and no one holds tight to it. You know what I'm saying? It's like we're all just saying, well, what about this? And we're growing in it. As we continue to grow, we will most likely only meet in the large gatherings once a month and gather in homes all the other Shabbats then throughout the month. If everyone came at the same time, we would easily be at the 60 mark and above. What's cool about our group is that even though our group is so large, everyone feels free to talk. There's very little reservations with everybody. They all feel they can, talk and feel free and not be judged even. Now, that's, odd for the norm. That's just not normal for many groups. A lot of times, people start closing up when a group gets to like the 20 to 30 mark. At that time, didn't just a few people end up becoming the dominant talkers in the group? It's only, it's really pretty much normal. It's really human nature even. At the same time, some people don't like being in smaller groups because it can really single you out as the only one who's not talking. Some people like being incognito in the larger groups. Again, that's kind of like just human nature. So there's a pro to both sizes of groups, both the large and small. But that also shows there's a need for both sizes of groups. And I really encourage smaller groups, but I also see the need for the larger meetings just the same. This format that we currently do, keeps the group connected while encouraging smaller group study at the same time. The time when we come together as a large group is a great time to invite a new person, because then they can go incognito and not feel everyone is looking at them. They can, listen in to the conversations and not feel they're being pointed out or not being the ones being spoken, if you will. They can just kind of go in and check it out. Then, if they want to dig deeper, they can attend one of the smaller groups. We believe this meets the pros for both sides. Now, to us, that's what it's all about. Bible believers coming together, growing together in the Bible. It's not about me or anyone else being over people. It's about believers growing together. Now, what if a time comes where someone presents something just really crazy? Well, if it's at my house, I say, that's cool. You can believe that, but we believe the Bible says this, and then I'll say whatever it is. If the person remains, persistent and wants to try to change everyone's mind, I will simply tell them again, hey, this is what we believe. If you wish to promote your belief, fine. Go start your own Bible study. And anyone here is welcome to go. Now, I'll warn everyone of my concerns about that belief, of what's being taught, but I won't prevent anyone from going. But what if someone wants to try to dominate the study? Well, the same principle applies. The head of the house takes control of that situation. If the person trying to dominate the study can't honor the head of the house has the right and obligation to remove that person from their home. If you come to my house, I'm in charge. If I go to your house, you're in charge. You allow what's in your home. If someone starts talking out of order, the head of that house keeps the order. The same applies to the larger gatherings. Whoever has their name on the rental agreement and is the one responsible for the building in case something happens to it, then that place is, in essence, their place when the group comes together. And they are the ones responsible for maintaining order. When we come together, it's not about trying to make your voice be heard. It's about learning and growing together, wanting to hear what others say, wanting to hear other perspectives, because we all know we can't have everything right. So we need to have that desire to want to say, well, what's your perspective on this? Am I missing something? In fact, we are about to start posting the same thing at our Shabbat gatherings that we do for our Sukkots. Now, this is what we announce at our Sukkots. This Sukkot is not for you if you feel compelled to tell everyone your pronunciation of the Hebrew Yod He Vav He is the correct pronunciation. You feel compelled to tell everyone your understanding of the calendar is the only true one. You feel compelled to tell everyone your understanding of the Scriptures is the only true inspired understanding. You feel compelled to tell everyone your understanding of the makeup of the cosmos is the correct understanding. This is not a time to come and make your fellow brothers and sisters your mission field to convince them of your beliefs. This is a time to come together and rejoice despite our differences. We're all growing at a different pace in our walk with the Father. It is of utmost importance to Torah family that we all respect that. Now, eventually, this will be what gets posted at our Shabbat gatherings. It's all about learning how to facilitate growth with one another, encouraging one another to share and grow as a body. Now, can bunny trails happen? Absolutely. And that's okay. Bunny trails can be fun at times. It's the responsibility of the host to keep those in control. We have zero intention of ever buying a building. We will never, and I mean never, be a 501c3 organization. Torah Family is not a 501c3 organization. We have a teaching that explains why we're not a 501c3 organization. We believe that opposes the Torah and is an extremely dangerous situation to be in. Please see our teaching on that. If there's ever a time that, that I can't be at our larger gatherings, well, then I just have a friend take over to do what I do. When we gather at individual homes, the leader of that home is the leader of that study. I don't just walk in and take control. It's their house, not mine. They are the ones in charge. Now, if they feel very uncomfortable with leading the Bible study, then sure, I'll lead if they ask. But even then, they're the leader of the study. It's their home. Whosever house we're at, it's a given that they're the leader of that study since we have crossed the threshold of their home, their domain. Now, we believe we're to multiply by division. However, a concern of mine is how that gets played out by many fellowships. Many times, smaller Bible studies are formed by people being told which one they're supposed to go to. But if they don't want to go to the one that they've been told to go to, if they don't want to go to the one they've been instructed to, well, what happens then? That just simply shows that we're right back to someone taking control and giving orders, making someone in charge. I'm sorry, that's just not the way it's supposed to be. That would mean someone's telling you what to do. It doesn't have to be that way. The smaller groups form naturally on the Sabbaths when the large group is not gathering. The Father will form those smaller groups as He sees fit. And there's nothing to say those small groups can't mix it up a little bit with one another throughout the weeks. What about differences of opinions, though? What do we do with those? Whenever there's a difference of opinion in a fellowship, you just simply say, well, guys, let's take this to prayer and study at home and see what we come up with. If the differences remain, then so be it. We simply continue with the differences. Now, if those differences prohibit the ability to continue as is, then you kindly part ways in love. You pray for the eyes of the others to be opened, and you pray that your eyes are opened in case you're the one in the wrong just the same. Again, it's about learning and growing together in love, not a dictatorship in any fashion by one man or a group of men. It's growing together as the body, with Yeshua being the head. In closing, as I stated, I believe this to be one of the most important teachings I have ever done. Please, don't let a man get between you and Yeshua. Please, don't get between another man and Yeshua. Please, take this teaching to heart. Well, that's all I have. As always, think about it. Pray about it. But more than anything, be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. Until next time, Shalom.